Okay, real talk for a second. How many of you have ever walked out of a networking event and felt like they were more lonely than when they walked in? Like you spent 2 hours surrounded by people and shook a dozen hands and collected a stack of business cards that are now sitting somewhere between your phone charger and yesterday's receipts. And somehow you feel like absolutely nothing happened. Sound familiar? Me too. And I've been doing this for a long time. In a nutshell, here's what I think is going on here. We've been taught to do networking wrong. And I don't mean slightly wrong. I mean fundamentally backwards, inside out, just wrong. We walk into rooms trying to collect contacts when what we actually need to be doing is building connections. We focus on what we can get, but the whole thing only works if we focus on what we can give. Today on Toby Talks, we're pulling apart the whole networking thing and putting it back together in a way that I think actually makes sense. Whether you love networking events, you tolerate them, or you would rather reorganize your sock drawer blindfolded than attend another industry mixer, this episode is for you. I'm Toby Hoy, and welcome to Toby Talks. Let's dive in. Let me describe the typical networking playbook and then tell me if any of this sounds familiar. You show up to the event, you grab a coffee or soda because holding something gives your hands a job to do. You scan the room looking for someone who looks as lost as you feel, and you approach them and they say, "So what do you do?" And you say your thing, and then they say their thing, and you both nod politely. And then one of you spots someone else that they know, and suddenly you're back to standing next to the cheese display and wondering if it's just too early to leave. Does that sound about right? Here's the thing, that whole experience is transactional, and people can feel it. The moment that someone senses they're being networked at rather than being talked with, something in them just shuts down. The conversation becomes an exchange of credentials rather than an actual human interaction. And nothing meaningful ever comes out of a credential exchange. Now, I'm not saying the traditional advice is completely useless. Showing up matters. Having a clear sense of what you do and why matters. Following up matters. But if those are the only tools you've got, you're missing the most important ingredient, which is a genuine interest in the other person. I want you to stop and think for a second about the best networking conversation that you've ever had. Maybe it was with a mentor who changed how you saw your career. Maybe it was a casual conversation at a conference that turned into a business partnership down the road. Maybe it was just someone you talked to at a party who you've stayed in touch with for years because they were genuinely interesting. So think about that conversation. What made it different? I'll bet it has nothing to do with elevator pitches or strategic follow-ups. I'll bet it was different because it felt real, because there was an actual curiosity on both sides, because you both learned something from each other. That feeling right there is what we're chasing. And once you understand how to create it on purpose, everything about networking changes. Okay, so here's the foundational shift. And everything else we talk about today will build on this. We need to stop asking the question of what can I get from this person and start asking the question of how can I be useful to this person. Now, I know that sounds very nice and fluffy and also maybe a little naive. You have goals. You need clients, you need contacts, you need referrals, you need opportunities, all the things, but you're not networking to make friends for the sake of just making friends. But here's the paradox that drives the whole thing. The people who approach networking with a giving mindset end up getting far more than the people who approach networking with a taking mindset. Not because the universe is rewarding them for their good intentions, but because relationships actually work that way. When you are generally trying to be useful to someone, a few things happen. First, you start listening differently. Instead of waiting for an opening to talk about yourself, you're actually paying attention to what they're saying and looking for ways to help or ask clarifying questions. The second point is they can feel that. And when someone feels like you actually care about what they're saying rather than just waiting for your turn to talk, they warm up, they open up, and they trust you faster. And trust, by the way, is the whole game. Business doesn't happen without trust. Referrals don't happen without trust. Opportunities don't get passed along without trust. And trust doesn't get built during an elevator pitch. It gets built through genuine interaction over time. The other thing I want to say about mindset is this. Stop measuring networking success by the number of cards you collect or the number of new connections you request on LinkedIn. Start measuring it by the quality of the conversations you had. 3 genuinely good conversations at an event where you actually learned something about someone and found a real point of connection. That is a wildly successful night. 20 surface level handshakes where nobody said anything real. That's a wasted evening, regardless of how many cards you walked away with. If you change the metric, you change the experience. Now, let's get practical. Good intentions alone don't make you great at networking. You need some actual tools and actual habits. And this starts with what you do before you walk in the door at the event. Most people treat networking events like an improv performance. They show up cold, they wing it, and then wonder while the conversations feel awkward. And a little preparation changes the game completely. Step number 1 for this is to know who's going to be there. Most professional events will give you some advance information, whether it's a speaker list, a sponsor roster, or an actual attendee list on an app or a website. If so, use it. Pick 2 or 3 people that you genuinely like to connect with and do a quick check on them. Review their LinkedIn, their company website, any recent content that they've published. This isn't about being a stalker. It's about being prepared. When you walk up to someone and ask a specific, informed question about something that they're actually working on, signals that you value their time and you did your homework. That's a completely different opening than walking up and, hey, what do you do for a living? Number 2 in this process is to know what you bring. Before you can be useful to anyone else, you need to know what you're useful for. Not a polished pitch, just a clear, honest understanding of your experience, your expertise, and the problems that you are genuinely good at solving. When you know that clearly, the conversation flows because you're not fumbling around to figure out how to describe yourself in that exact moment. Step number 3 is to set realistic goals. Here's the one I want you to hold on to. Don't go into the event trying to meet every single person. Go in trying to have 3 meaningful conversations. That's it. 3 conversations where you learn a legitimate fact about the other person and find a genuine point of connection, and then leave knowing something about that person that you didn't know before. If you get to 3 meaningful conversations and the night is over, that's a win. If you get to 3 and the night is still young, go for a 4th. But stop making the goal meeting as many people as possible. That goal produces exactly the kind of shallow, forgettable interactions that make people hate networking events in the first place. All right, so you're at the event, you've done your prep, you've identified a few people that you want to connect with, and you walk up to someone. Now what? First thing is ditch the default question. What do you do? Is the networking equivalent of asking someone their zodiac sign. It's a reflex, and it gets a reflex answer, and almost nothing ever leads anywhere interesting. Replace that question with something that actually invites a real response. Try, hey, what are you working on right now that has you most excited? Or what brought you to this event? Or what's the biggest challenge that your team deals with these days? Notice what those questions have in common. They all invite the person to share something real, something current, and something they actually care about. And when someone starts talking about something that they actually care about, the whole energy of the conversation shifts. You're not just trading credentials anymore. You're actually talking with each other. Once you've asked a good question, the next job is to actually listen to the answer. I know this sounds obvious, but it's not obvious. Most people in networking conversations spend the other person's talking time internally preparing themselves to make their own next point. Don't do that. Real, active listening means following up on what the person actually said. If someone mentions a challenge that they're dealing with, ask a follow-up question about that specific challenge. If they share something exciting, ask, well, what drives your excitement about that? And you show them with your questions that you actually heard what they said. That's rare. And being rare is being memorable. Personally, I have a rough guide that I use for everything. It's the 80-20 rule based on the Pareto principle. If you're spending about 80% of the networking conversation listening and about 20% talking, you're doing the right thing. If you're not, you're doing it wrong. The best networkers I know ask great questions and then get genuinely interested in the answers from the other person. They don't see conversations as a stage for their own story. They see it as a window into someone else's story. And here's something else worth mentioning. You don't have to stay in a conversation forever just because it started well. When you're ready to move on, just be honest about it. Something along the lines of, hey, this has been a genuinely great conversation, but I don't want to keep you and monopolize you all night. Can we swap cards and then continue this later? It's clean, it's direct, respectful, and done. Most people are actually relieved that someone else ended it gracefully because they were wondering how to get away as well. Okay, so you had a great conversation, you exchanged cards and contact information, and you left feeling like something actually happened. Right here is where most people completely drop the ball, and that's on the follow-up, or more precisely, the lack of follow-up. Because here's the reality. You can have the best conversation of your professional life, and if you don't follow up, it essentially never happened. The connection lives and dies in the follow-up. Here's my strategy, and it's pretty simple. Step number one is to follow up within 24 to 48 hours, not a week later. That conversation needs to still be fresh enough that your message leads with some warmth. A great to meet you last Tuesday text or email a week after the fact doesn't have the same energy as reaching out the next day when the interaction is still recent in their mind. Number two is to reference something specific from that conversation. Not just, hey, it was great to meet you, but something real. Like, I really enjoyed our conversation about managing distributed teams or whatever else it is. And I thought about that this morning when I came across this particular article. So I'm passing it along. You've now done three things with that one message. Number one, you proved you actually listened. Number two, you showed and you remembered what they said. And three, you've added a little bit of value. That combination is genuinely rare. And because it's so rare, it's genuinely impressive. Number three is do not pitch. I cannot stress this enough. The follow-up message after a first meeting is not the time to introduce your services or ask for a favor or request an introduction to someone in their network. You just met. There isn't any trust yet. The follow-up is about solidifying the connection, not cashing it in. There will be time for business conversations, and that time is not immediately after the first handshake. If your natural follow-up mode is to pitch, I want you to reframe what you're doing in your head. You're not closing, you're planting, and you wouldn't harvest a field that you just seeded yesterday. All right, last section before we land this puppy. A connection isn't a relationship, period. A connection is a door that has just been opened. The relationship is everything that happens after you walk through that door. And most people don't build a relationship because they only reach out when they need something. Here's the alternative: stay in touch with no agenda. Find an article that reminded you of something that they mentioned and send it along with a quick note. Congratulate them when something good happens in their career, or check in on a project that they mentioned a few months back and ask how it went. These small, simple, unprompted gestures go more for to building a professional relationship than 100 coffee meeting requests. And here's the move that almost nobody talks about, but it's one of the most powerful things that you can do, is to be a connector. When you realize that there are two people in your network that should know each other, introduce them. Write a thoughtful note that explains why you think they would benefit from connecting with each other. You've now become valuable to both of them at the same time, and you didn't ask for a single thing in return. That right there is relationship capital. The long game of networking is this: build your network before you need it. Don't start looking for connections when you're in a crisis. Build relationships consistently over time with genuine care. And then when you actually need something, you won't have to reach out to a cold contact. You'll be able to reach out to somebody who already knows you, already trusts you, hopefully likes you, and is genuinely glad to help you. That right there, that's the whole game. That's the one thing that nobody tells you at a networking seminar. It's not a tactic. It's not a technique. It's a habit. It's a long-term, consistent habit of generosity. All right, so that's a wrap on today's episode of Toby Talks. Here's what I'd like you to take away from this episode. Networking isn't something that you do at events with a stack of business cards. It's the practice of showing up genuinely curious, listening generously, being reliably useful, and staying in touch over time. If you do those things consistently, your professional network will be one of the most valuable things that you've ever built. If this episode was useful, please share it with someone who dreads the next networking event on their calendar. And if you want more on this topic, the full blog post is up at toby-talks.com. As always, I'm Toby Hoy. Thanks for spending a few minutes with me today. Go out and make some actual connections.